and good evening. I'm Melissa Idris. Welcome to Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. When Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim initially announced his cabinet, the Arts and Culture Department was not included in the lineup. Tiong King Sing was announced as the Minister of Tourism, which had then raised some questions about where the arts and culture portfolio was going to be placed. It was previously with the tourism portfolio under one ministry, MOTEC. It was only after the first cabinet meeting that the matter was settled, that arts and culture would remain under the same federal ministry as tourism. Now, was this an innocent mistake, or was this demonstrative of the lack of policy attention given to the arts in Malaysia? Joining me now is Izan Satriana Muhammad Salihuddin. She's the Senior Director of Partnerships and the Creative Sector at Think City. Prior to this role, she was the founder and former CEO of Cendana, Malaysia's cultural economy development agency, which is dedicated to building a sustainable cultural economy. Izan, good of you to join me. I appreciate your time. Now, it was initially understood that the Arts and Culture Department was meant to be separated from the Tourism Ministry, but I think the decision to keep the cabinet smallish, meant that the Ministry of Tourism, Arts and Culture, MOTEC, would be retained. So do you think that this configuration works, Izan? Does arts and culture warrant or merit a separate and independent portfolio from tourism?
Sure. Hi, Melissa. Thanks for that question. Well, arts and culture remain very important, and the creative economy at large very important for Malaysia. But whether the question of combining arts and culture and tourism is something that should have been retained or otherwise, I think it's a big question. Ideally, all creative sectors and cultural sectors should be combined under one ministry so we can achieve a collective impact. But if you actually refer to neighboring countries and developed countries and how they implement their arts and culture, I'll take Indonesia for an example. Their preservation, conservation work and safeguarding culture is under the Ministry of Education, Culture, Research, and Technology. So it's a bigger ministry looking into different sectors, combining arts and culture. But they also have a separate portfolio, Creative Economy, which is under the Ministry of Tourism and Creative Economy, that looks into the creative economy value chain, whether it's financing, access, infrastructure, marketing, capacity building. And that's how they've split their portfolio. I think in UK, Australia, and Thailand, it's under one ministry specifically, but it is combined. When I say one ministry specifically, I'm referring to arts and culture, creative economy, but it is also combined with other components. UK, for example, is combined with digital media and sports. And in Australia, you have arts and culture combined with infrastructure, transport, and regional development. So I think it's not, the question is whether it warrants a ministry is not really the main focus. It should be whether arts and culture will have its development and consistently.
It's quite interesting that you brought that up, because I didn't know. I mean, there are so many different permutations around the world of where arts and culture and how to kind of fit it in. I like the idea of placing it with education. It's interesting with digital media. You talked about the way arts and culture interacts as well with kind of the built environment, with transport and urban heritage as well. Quite interesting, Izan. But can I ask you, the concern with of many Malaysians, particularly those within the creative sector, is that by combining it with the tourism ministry, there's a fear that arts and culture will be sidelined in terms of funding, in terms of policy attention, because we tend to focus a lot on the material, commercial aspects of tourism. Is that a concern that you may share?
I can understand the concern, I can't speak on behalf of MOTAC, but from my understanding and observation, MOTAC is divided under two different teams. There is the tourism team, and there is also the arts and culture team. And the arts and culture team actually has their policy team as well, looking into these policies. It's just a matter of whether we get a bigger slice of the pie at the table at the moment. Because tourism is a big economy driver for the country, hence why the bigger pie is being given to them versus arts and culture. But if you look into a different side of the coin, we don't necessarily have to look into arts and culture being just predominantly an economy driver. It can be seen from social dividends to the nation. It can be in the form of unity. I had a conversation once, in a very uh, aggressive but stimulating conversation with a colleague as to why sports was under when you purchase sports equipment, it is accepted under tax assessments as a tax relief. But at that point of time, arts and culture wasn't. I'm not too sure if it is now, but their perspective is that it is good to motivate and encourage Malaysians to go into sports. So at the end of the day, the government does not have to pay for such high bills for its rakyat when it comes to its medical bills. But my perspective is that if we do not give the same attention, at the end of the day, if our Malaysians forget where we come from and where our history is, where all our background and stories, we would have to spend so much more later on to educate them. So where is his perspective, and who can shed some light on that?
That's brilliant. Can I ask you, in the couple of minutes that we have left with you, the um, combining or the focus of kind of the arts and culture under tourism, or combining these as different departments in one ministry, if we were to look at it together, is there concern of tourism and perhaps the commodification of culture? So what happens with culture, our heritage, our arts, becomes purely just for tourists? Is that a concern?
Well, I think we need to use a different language when it comes to arts and culture. Again, it comes to the point that not necessarily arts and culture should be viewed similarly to tourism for commercial yield. There are different benefits for arts and culture and why we should pay attention to it. But if we talk about economic dividends per se, in Think City, for example, if I take the work that they've done in Georgetown from what it was before, a lot of people leaving Georgetown. It is one of the best cities in the world, a global arts hub, and it's seen very differently. I think we can review it with a different set of lens when it comes to different things. But I hear you, Melissa. I think definitely arts and culture, it needs a different language. It can be for social dividends. It can be for unity. It can be for economic dividends. We just, I think, need leadership. We need commitment to an approved, consolidated, broader plan that includes everyone's input. And we need to make sure all the things that everyone's doing on the ground at the moment, whether it's public, private, or community, it must have a common theme. And that way you can have a collective impact.
Izan, thank you so much for speaking with me. Izan Satriana Muhammad Salahuddin from Think City. We're going to take a quick break here and consider this. We'll be back with more on this topic. Stay tuned. Hi, welcome back to Consider This. I'm Melissa Idris. Over the decades, we have seen the arts and culture portfolio in the federal government move from ministry to ministry. Previous permutations include combining it with the Ministry of Information and Communications. Before 1987, it was combined with the Youth and Sports Ministry, and now it seems we have settled to have it under the Ministry of Tourism, Arts and Culture, MOTEC. So my next guest, Dato' Halimah Muhammad Syed, is president of the Association of Voices of Peace, Conscience and Reason, known as PICO. She's arguing that the arts and culture portfolio should be under the Ministry of National Unity. Dato' Halimah, thank you for joining me. Why do you argue that the arts and culture portfolio should be under the Ministry of National Unity and not tourism?
Hi, Melissa. Nice to see you again. Now, I just want to make a little correction. I'm no longer with the Association Voices of Peace, Conscience and Reason. I've given up the leadership to somebody else. So I'm like my own person now. So I can speak more freely. Right. Yes. We were very upset when we realized that the culture portfolio had been left out of the lineup, of the cabinet ministers and so on. And very hurriedly, it was put back into tourism as a money earner for that ministry. So I really think that culture has far-reaching objectives, which go across money-making, initiatives and money-making objectives. And I think its place is really, in the Perpaduan government. Its place should be in the Perpaduan ministry, the Ministry of Unity, because one of the parameters of culture is that it is a great bonding, community bonding, um, you know, um, it is good for community bonding. We see all the cultural, dances and performances and so on, and it's a great mix of the different ethnicities and so on, and that's wonderful. It's visible, it's tangible, and everybody partakes of the joy of performing the dances and the arts and what else.
All right.
Also a great proponent of art, art as in drawing and painting and so on. And that also brings communities together in a great hub of unity and harmony.
Right. So you're saying this was a missed opportunity to use arts and culture to be a unifying factor among Malaysians, particularly in these recent days. We have seen quite more polarization in society. My question is, sometimes the criticism levied to the arts and culture portfolio is that there is so much attention being placed onto Malay and Islamic culture and not other cultures. They often tend to be sidelined. That, I think, is one of the ways in which it's not very unifying. It's not celebrating the spirit of Malaysia. Would you say, in that respect, we have ways to go?
I think so. It can be corrected very quickly if we have good role models and leaders of industry supporting the performances or the input from different communities. All you need is sponsorship. Now, of course, for the government agencies, they do their thing. They have a lot of Malay and Islamic culture thrown in there by sheer, what's going on out there, and, very, forceful leaders of industry supporting the arts and culture. I think we can make it a happening thing and really unite society. It's a beautiful platform for unity. And I think the Paduan government should actually look into it very seriously.
I like that Indonesia has placed its art and culture portfolio with its education portfolio. I think that's something to be said there. What do you think Malaysia's education system can do to perhaps combine, because it's not just about arts and culture, it's also about creativity, the creative sector, which perhaps the education sector might benefit from having a lovely boost of creativity?
I think they're already into that, Melissa, because when I was in PCOR, and it was the end of my tenure there, we were promoting this harmony mesra saling hormati concept, and the schools were already having their extramural activities in art, in dance, in music, and so on. So it's a matter of coordinating these movements within the state, within the region, within the district, and going up to state and then federal level. So I don't think it's a problem at all in school. But somebody actually suggested we twin education and culture. I think that's too big. Education by itself is already huge. So if you insert culture as a formal part of the ministry, it's going to be messy. Yeah.
Right.
So, culture is already in education. So it's a matter of fine-tuning it.
Very quickly, can I ask you, what policy attention would you like this current government to give to the creative sector, to give to the arts and culture sector?
More funding, more partnerships, because, we're doing, like for instance, I'm doing a lot on my own with my own, resources, a regular enterprise. Let's call it enterprise. I think the present government is into enterprise and economic ventures and so on. So let's go that way and make it a huge cultural enterprise, a creative industry.
Thank you so much, Dr. Halimah Muhammad Said. We're going to take a break here and consider this. We will be back with more. Don't go anywhere. Stay tuned. Hi, I'm Melissa Idris. Thanks so much for staying with me on Consider This. Let's continue our discussion about the policy priorities of this new government for the arts in Malaysia. Let's speak now to Jo Kukatas. She's director, writer and actor, as well as the co-founder of the Instant Cafe Theatre. Jo, thank you for joining me on the show today. Let's talk a little bit about how the arts and culture portfolio was left out from the initial cabinet announcement, only for cabinet to decide after the fact that it would remain with tourism under MOTEC. Do you think this was an innocent mistake, or was this, as someone who is within the industry, demonstrative of the lack of policy attention given to the arts in Malaysia?
Yeah, I think it may well have been an innocent mistake, but it is indicative of a larger malaise that's sort of affecting us all, that people don't quite understand the role that the arts and culture play in a country. And I think this has been affecting us, ever since, I think, the 80s, when arts and culture was seen to be a commodity, when it first, I think, became commodified and was seen as being something that could be an expression of tourism. And I think, for many years, those of us in the arts and culture have always said it would be good for arts and culture to be allied, not necessarily with tourism, although I think that, of course, I'm not saying that there is no relationship that can be had, but I think our more natural partners would be heritage, would be education. And yet I think we either get seen as something that could be of benefit of to tourism, to bring tourists to Malaysia, or what has happened in the 2000s was suddenly, arts and culture will be part of the creative industries. And in a way, those creative industries that were essentially commercial industries, entertainment, commercial film,
Right.
animation. So we got a bit lost, I think, in that mix.
Could I ask you to elaborate on the use of the term creative industries? It seems to be like a catch-all for anything to do with the arts or with creativity. How do you think this government, how do you think Malaysia and previous governments as well view what they term creative industries?
I think that they're not really that clear. I think they sort of see what happens elsewhere in the world in terms of, let's say, for example, Korea did so well in the film industry, we should be more like Korea, and let's have Parasite. The number of times a minister said, let's make an Oscar-winning film. But you can't have that at the beginning. Parasite only was a result of many years of nurturing a domestic industry. And I think I have no issue with tourism as such. I think that, I recently went to Barcelona, and it was really interesting seeing how when you have city planning, when you have town planning, and when you have artists involved, you create a place which is attractive to other artists, therefore attractive to thinkers, attractive to intellectuals, and therefore the country and the city becomes a very attractive place in many ways. That's why I think, for me, heritage is such an important part of it. What is the place we want to live in? What is the city we want to live in? Mm-hmm. What about our small towns? What do they look like now? So they've been turned into concrete bunkers, right? Factory towns. Where are the towns that we see in our nostalgic festive season ads? Where are the towns and cities of Lut? We seem to want that, but we don't do anything about it, right? Because we only see things on an industrial level and not see things on a human level. And I think the artist is quite different from the commercial entertainer, because the artist is sort of interested in asking these questions about their neighbor, their people across the road, people in another space. We're idealists, we're romantic. We kind of want to know, where's that space for all of the people who live in the margins, because we ourselves are quite marginal people or marginalized people. So we think on the margins. I think it's necessary to have people thinking about the margins.
Do you think that this was a missed opportunity for the new government to rethink how Malaysia supports the arts, not the creative industry, but the arts and culture. And heritage is conspicuously missing from any title in any ministry.
Yeah. You know, it was such an anxiety-inducing election. I think that we were just glad that there was a cabinet. I don't want to see it now as a missed opportunity, because for me now it's something which has been decided upon. But I think that I'm glad we're having this conversation. And I saw, for example, yesterday, an article interviewing the new minister, Cheong, where he talked about, yes, there was a lot to know, a lot to find out. And he was talking about a program he wanted to do for disabled and artists, for example, right? And he said that there was, he wanted to make sure that those people like that were not left behind. Now, while I applaud things like that, I also think it is indicative of the way that we are approached as people who need welfare, as opposed to people in the arts and culture actually having a lot to offer the country. I think that's a missed opportunity for a conversation. But I don't think it's too late to have that conversation. I think we need to have a really strong conversation right now about the role that arts and culture can play. And even if we are parked under tourism, well, what kind of tourism? What about tourism which revitalizes a particular town, or revitalize, and not for international tourism, but for the people who live in the next state? I mean, we want to go to Malacca, but what has become of Malacca? I mean, there are people already outside the government trying to have a conversation, a real conversation about art and heritage in Malacca. Government needs to engage with organizations like that. Government needs to engage with organizations like Reformatsi, which want to have these conversations at a macro level and a micro level. And Reformatsi, for example, deals with education, they deal with heritage, they deal with freedom of expression, they deal with all the things which are sort of the intellectual grounding for a new country, or a country that wants to move forward.
Joe, you mentioned something a little interesting in that answer. You talked about viewing artists as needing welfare, as from that lens. Could you elaborate what you mean by that?
Well, I think we need to have a more egalitarian approach towards art and art making. It isn't like that we will exploit the artists to sell products to tourists, right? But rather, artists can help you to revitalize a place. But neither are artists people who we want to say, oh, poor things, they're suffering, they're not doing well. Here, let us give them 500 ringgit. Because then they will see themselves, I mean, they become that, right? As opposed to people who have something to offer, and that you're giving them this because that's their worth. Not like we'll make sure they don't suffer, but rather what they have to offer is something nobody else has to offer, right? I mean, we would never talk about people in other areas in the same way, but I do find that there is a lot of, I would have to say the word condescension towards people who have a lot to offer. And I think that's why a lot of artists, our traditional artists, no longer work in those areas. And we wonder why, but we don't do anything deeper about it. Although I say that, but yet in the previous government, the 2018 government, when Mohammed Bakhtiar was deputy minister of MOTAC, he took this to heart, I think, and he traveled a lot around Malaysia, gathering data, talking to people, getting information. I think that for me was a really good start. It's to say, let's find out what's going on. Let's talk to a lot of people. So for me, I don't want to say, oh no, this is wrong, that we're under tourism, but what is the Ministry of Tourism? How are they going to separate arts and culture? How are they not going to think of it as being something to exploit, but rather, and neither to something that they have to give welfare to, but what is the conversation about how artists and ministries can work hand in hand to revitalize, to add value, to make people be more than just units of productivity, because I think we become unhappy. Our only purpose in the life is to be a productive unit. And as the pandemic showed us, we all need much more than that. I mean, for our souls, for our self.
Yes.
And we shouldn't forget that important lesson. And I think that's why we need to have that conversation. What's our role? Yeah.
Joe, thank you so much for speaking with me today. Joe Kakitas, director, writer and actor, co-founder of Instant Cafe Theatre. That wraps up this episode of Consider This. I'm Melissa Idris, signing off for the evening. Thank you so much for watching and good night.